The morning sun cast long shadows across the grand square as Captain Marcus Sheffield stood at his post near the palace gates. His uniform was pressed to perfection, medals gleaming against the deep blue fabric. He had served the royal family for 15 years, and nothing unusual had ever happened during his watch. The square was filled with tourists snapping photos and locals hurrying to work. Pigeons pecked at breadcrumbs near the fountain while street vendors prepared their carts for the day. Marcus checked his watch. It was 7:30 in the morning. The changing of the guard would happen in an hour. He noticed his colleague, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, adjusting her hat as she took her position at the eastern gate. They exchanged a brief nod. The protocols were clear and simple. Stand firm, remain alert, and protect the royal grounds at all costs. It seemed like another ordinary day in the capital city. The square had been peaceful for months. Security had been tight ever since the incident last year when protesters had gathered outside the gates. But that was handled without any real danger. Marcus felt confident in his training and the security systems in place. Cameras monitored every corner. Plainclothes officers mingled with the crowd. The perimeter was secure. A group of school children walked by with their teacher, pointing excitedly at the guards in their ceremonial uniforms. Marcus remained perfectly still as tradition demanded. His mind wandered briefly to his daughter's birthday party next week. He needed to pick up her gift after his shift. His wife had texted him a reminder that morning. Near the fountain, a street musician began playing violin. The melody drifted across the square, mixing with the sounds of footsteps and distant traffic. Marcus loved this about his job. The history, the tradition, the sense of purpose. He was protecting something bigger than himself. The royal family represented stability and continuity in a changing world. At 7:45, Marcus noticed a van parked near the south entrance. It was a delivery van, white with faded lettering on the side. Nothing seemed out of place. Delivery vehicles came and went all morning. The driver sat inside, apparently checking paperwork. Marcus made a mental note but saw no reason for concern. Sarah's radio crackled. She spoke quietly into it, then resumed her position. The morning briefing had mentioned nothing unusual. Intelligence reports were clear. Threat level was normal. The day's schedule included a diplomatic reception in the afternoon, but that was hours away. A woman with a red scarf walked past Marcus, talking on her phone. She seemed frustrated about something, gesturing with her free hand. Behind her, a man in a gray coat carried a briefcase. Office workers streamed into the government buildings surrounding the square. Everything looked routine. Marcus thought about the protocols he had memorized. In case of any threat, the first priority was to secure the royal family. The second was to lock down the palace. The third was to coordinate with backup units. He had practiced these procedures hundreds of times in training. They were second nature now. The delivery van's engine started. Marcus watched as it began to move slowly along the square's edge. The driver seemed to be looking for a parking spot closer to one of the buildings. Traffic was light at this hour. A taxi honked at a pedestrian who had stepped into the street without looking. Lieutenant Chen stretched slightly, easing the tension in her shoulders. Standing perfectly still for long periods was harder than it looked. Tourists often joked about trying to make the guards laugh or move. Marcus had developed an impressive ability to ignore distractions. He focused on his breathing, keeping his expression neutral. The violin player switched to a different song. Some tourists stopped to listen, dropping coins into the open case at his feet. A couple posed for a selfie with the palace in the background. The woman adjusted her sunglasses and smiled at the camera. Her companion wrapped an arm around her shoulder. Marcus's radio remained silent. That was good. Silence meant everything was normal. He could see other guards at their positions around the square. Each one stood with the same rigid posture, the same unwavering focus. They were like statues, symbols of order and duty. The white van completed its circle around the square and stopped again, this time on the western side. Marcus made another mental note. The driver was still inside. Maybe he was waiting for someone, or perhaps he was early for a delivery and killing time. Marcus had seen it before. A jogger passed by, earbuds in place, focused on the path ahead. The morning was warming up. The sky was clear except for a few thin clouds. It would be a beautiful day. Marcus allowed himself a brief smile, hidden behind his professional demeanor. Life was good. His family was healthy. His job was secure. The kingdom was at peace. At 7:55, Marcus saw movement from the corner of his eye. The van's back doors opened slightly. He tensed, his training kicking in immediately. His hand moved closer to his radio, ready to call it in. But then he saw what appeared to be boxes inside. Maybe it was just a legitimate delivery after all. Then everything changed in a heartbeat. The doors flew completely open and 3 figures jumped out. They were dressed in black, faces covered with masks. Before Marcus could reach his radio, he heard the first explosion. It came from the eastern gate where Sarah had been standing. Smoke billowed into the air. People started screaming. Marcus's mind went into overdrive. His training took control of his body. He pressed the emergency button on his radio while drawing his weapon. More explosions followed, rapid succession, coming from different points around the square. The peaceful morning had transformed into chaos within seconds. Tourists ran in all directions, screaming and crying. The violin clattered to the ground, forgotten. The 3 figures from the van were running toward the palace gates. Marcus could see weapons in their hands. He raised his own weapon, shouting commands that were lost in the noise. Glass shattered somewhere nearby. Another explosion shook the ground beneath his feet. Smoke was everywhere now, making it hard to see. Then he heard it, the sound that made his blood run cold. The palace sirens. They echoed through the square, loud and piercing. It was the sound that meant the kingdom was under attack. The sound that everyone hoped they would never hear. The sound that changed everything. Captain Marcus Sheffield's heart pounded as the sirens wailed across the square. Smoke filled his lungs, making him cough. He could barely see 10 feet ahead. People were still screaming, running blindly through the chaos. A child was crying somewhere to his left. He wanted to help everyone, but his duty was clear. Protect the palace. Protect the royal family. Through his radio, voices shouted urgent commands. The emergency channel was alive with reports from different positions. Sarah's voice came through, strained but steady. She was alive. The explosion at her gate had been close but not direct. She was engaging targets on the eastern side. Marcus acknowledged and moved toward the main entrance. 2 of the masked attackers were trying to breach the palace gates. They carried small explosive devices. Marcus aimed carefully despite his shaking hands. He had never fired his weapon outside of training. Never faced real danger like this, but his body remembered what to do. He squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed across the square. 1 attacker fell. The second attacker turned toward Marcus, raising a weapon. Time seemed to slow down. Marcus saw the barrel pointing at him. He dove behind a stone pillar just as bullets chipped away at the spot where he had been standing. His shoulder hit the ground hard. Pain shot through his arm, but he ignored it. He rolled to a better position and returned fire. Backup units were responding. Marcus could hear their sirens approaching from different directions. But the attackers had chosen their moment well. Morning rush hour. Maximum confusion. The square was a maze of panicked civilians. Police units would have trouble getting through the crowds and traffic. Marcus glanced at the palace entrance. The heavy doors were sealed. Protocol was working. The royal family would be in the secure bunker by now, deep underground where nothing could reach them. But the attackers didn't seem interested in getting inside anymore. They were causing destruction, creating terror. That realization made Marcus's stomach turn. This wasn't a kidnapping attempt. It was something worse. Another explosion rocked a building on the south side of the square. Windows shattered, raining glass onto the street below. Marcus saw people covering their heads trying to find shelter. A woman clutched her bleeding arm. An elderly man had fallen and couldn't get up. The scene was nightmarish. Through the smoke, Marcus spotted the 3rd attacker from the van. This one was different. Taller, moving with more confidence. The leader, perhaps. This figure wasn't attacking the palace. Instead, they were setting up what looked like a camera on a tripod. They were filming this, broadcasting it. Marcus felt rage building inside him. Sarah's voice came through the radio again. She had taken down 2 attackers on her side, but more were appearing. Where were they all coming from? Intelligence had given no warning. No chatter, no hints. How had they missed this? Marcus pushed those thoughts away. Questions could wait. Right now, he needed to act. He moved from his cover, staying low, using the smoke as concealment. Other guards were emerging from their positions, forming a defensive perimeter around the palace. They were outnumbered but better trained. Marcus could see Lieutenant James Harrison coordinating movements on the western flank. The Royal Guard was responding exactly as they had practiced countless times. The attacker with the camera noticed Marcus approaching. They abandoned the equipment and pulled out a weapon. Marcus fired first. The shot went wide. The attacker returned fire, bullets sparking off the cobblestones near Marcus's feet. He rolled behind the fountain, cold water splashing over him from bullet impacts hitting the stone basin. Civilian casualties were mounting. Marcus could see bodies lying motionless on the ground. Others were wounded, crying out for help. Medical teams wouldn't be able to reach them until the square was secured. Every second counted. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. These were his people, his city, his kingdom. The first police units arrived at the square's perimeter. Officers were trying to establish a secure line, evacuating civilians while identifying threats, but the smoke and confusion made everything difficult. Marcus saw one officer go down, shot by an attacker hiding behind a vendor's cart. Another officer dragged their wounded colleague to safety. Marcus's ammunition was running low. He checked his spare magazines, one left. He needed to make every shot count. Through the smoke, he saw Sarah making her way toward the fountain. She had blood on her face but was moving steadily. Their eyes met. No words were needed. They had trained together for years. Each knew what the other would do. They moved in coordination, Sarah covering Marcus as he advanced on the camera position. The lead attacker was nowhere to be seen now. The camera was still running, recording everything. Marcus wanted to destroy it, but Sarah shook her head. Evidence. They needed evidence. Forensics could trace the equipment, find out who was behind this. More attackers appeared from the smoke. 5, maybe 6. They were regrouping, preparing for another assault. Marcus and Sarah took defensive positions. Other guards joined them. They formed a line between the attackers and the palace. Whatever happened, the royal family would be protected. That was their oath. That was their purpose. The sirens continued their haunting cry. Emergency vehicles surrounded the square now. Fire trucks, ambulances, more police units. A helicopter thundered overhead, probably military. The kingdom's defense forces were mobilizing, but the battle wasn't over yet. The attackers showed no signs of retreating. Marcus thought of his daughter. Would he see her again? Would he make it to her birthday party? He pushed those thoughts down deep. Fear was natural, but he couldn't let it control him. He was a captain of the Royal Guard. He had responsibilities. People depended on him. One attacker broke from the group, making a desperate run toward the palace gates. Marcus tracked the movement and fired. The attacker stumbled but kept moving. Sarah fired too. This time the attacker fell and didn't get up. The remaining attackers seemed to hesitate. They had expected an easy target. Instead, they faced trained soldiers who refused to yield. Marcus's radio crackled with a new voice. Commander Peterson, the head of palace security. His calm, authoritative tone cut through the chaos. Reinforcements were 2 minutes away. Special response teams were en route. The square would be locked down completely. No one in or out. Marcus acknowledged the order. 2 minutes felt like an eternity. The attackers seemed to realize their window was closing. They began firing wildly, not aiming, just trying to create maximum chaos. Bullets ricocheted off stone walls. More windows shattered. Marcus kept his head down, waiting for the right moment. Then he heard a new sound cutting through the noise. Rotors. Multiple helicopters. He risked a glance upward and saw 3 military helicopters approaching. Fast response teams. The elite soldiers who trained for exactly this scenario. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. They weren't alone anymore. Help had arrived. The tide was about to turn. The military helicopters descended rapidly, their powerful downdraft scattering smoke and debris across the square. Ropes dropped from the sides and black-clad Special Forces soldiers rappelled down with practiced precision. They hit the ground running, weapons ready, moving in tight formations that spoke of countless hours of training. Marcus felt his spirits lift. These were the best soldiers the kingdom had. The attackers realized they were now trapped. The square was surrounded. More police units had blocked every exit. The helicopters circled overhead like predators. There was no escape route. Marcus watched as the remaining attackers clustered together near the eastern wall. They were shouting to each other, panic evident in their movements even though their faces remained hidden. Lieutenant Sarah Chen moved closer to Marcus, reloading her weapon. Her hands were steady despite the blood still trickling down from a cut above her eye. She wiped it away with her sleeve and focused on the situation. The Special Forces team leader was issuing commands through the radio. All Royal Guard members were to hold positions and provide support. The Special Forces would handle the remaining attackers. Marcus counted 6 hostiles still active. Maybe more hiding in the smoke. Bodies lay scattered across the cobblestones. Both attackers who had fallen and innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. The sight made Marcus sick. This square had always been a place of peace, a symbol of the kingdom's stability. Now it looked like a war zone. One of the Special Forces teams moved toward the clustered attackers with shields raised. Their commander called out through a megaphone demanding surrender. The amplified voice echoed off the surrounding buildings. "Lay down your weapons. This is your only chance. Nobody else needs to die today." The message was clear and firm. The attackers didn't respond to the warning. Instead, one of them raised what looked like a phone or remote device. Marcus felt ice flood his veins. A dead man's switch. If that attacker was taken down, would it trigger more explosives? He grabbed his radio and shouted a warning. The Special Forces commander acknowledged immediately. All units were ordered to hold fire. The standoff stretched out. Seconds felt like minutes. The sirens had finally stopped, leaving an eerie quiet broken only by the helicopter rotors and distant sounds of emergency vehicles. Civilians had mostly been evacuated from the immediate area. Medical teams were treating the wounded behind the police lines. But the crisis wasn't over. Through the thinning smoke, Marcus could see the lead attacker more clearly now, the tall figure who had been setting up the camera earlier. This person stood slightly ahead of the others, the phone held high so everyone could see it. Marcus wondered what was going through their mind. Did they really think they could escape? Or was this always meant to be a suicide mission? Sarah touched Marcus's arm and pointed. Another van, identical to the first one, was parked on the north side. Had it been there all along? Or had it arrived during the chaos? Marcus felt his stomach drop. If there were more explosives in that vehicle, positioned near the police lines, it could cause massive casualties among the responding units. He radioed the information to Commander Peterson. The bomb squad was immediately dispatched. 2 specialists in heavy protective gear approached the van carefully, using a robot to investigate. Everyone watched with held breath. The robot's camera feed showed the van's interior was empty.
False alarm.
But it proved how on edge everyone was. The lead attacker began speaking. Not loud enough to hear clearly from Marcus's position, but the Special Forces team with the megaphone was close enough. Whatever was said made the commander pause. Then came the response through the megaphone. "We can talk about your demands, but first you need to release that trigger. Show good faith." Marcus didn't like negotiations. His training said never negotiate with terrorists. But he also understood the reality. If those explosives went off now, they could kill dozens of officers and soldiers. The Special Forces commander was buying time, probably waiting for snipers to get into position, or for the bomb squad to locate and disable any remaining explosives. One of the younger guards near Marcus looked terrified. The kid couldn't be more than 22, fresh out of academy. This was probably his first real posting. Marcus caught his eye and gave a small nod. "Stay strong, stay focused." The young guard swallowed hard and nodded back, gripping his weapon tighter. Minutes crawled by. Marcus's legs were cramping from staying in a crouched position behind the fountain. Water from earlier bullet impacts had soaked through his uniform. He was cold, tired, and running on pure adrenaline, but he didn't dare move. Any sudden motion might trigger the situation into violence again. Sarah was scanning the rooftops. Smart. Snipers would be up there now, finding angles. Marcus followed her gaze and spotted movement on a building to the west. A glint of sunlight on a scope. Good. The net was tightening, but they still needed that trigger released or disabled. Otherwise, this could end in tragedy. The lead attacker seemed to be arguing with the others. Marcus could see gestures, angry movements. Maybe they were realizing their plan had failed. Maybe they were debating whether to surrender or go down fighting. Internal divisions could work in the security forces' favor, or it could make someone act rashly. A news helicopter appeared in the distance, quickly shooed away by one of the military helicopters. But Marcus knew the media had already captured plenty. This attack would be international news within hours. The kingdom's reputation for safety was shattered. Tourism would suffer. Investor confidence might waver. The attackers had succeeded in creating terror, even if they failed in whatever their ultimate goal had been. Commander Peterson's voice came through the radio with new orders. A tactical team was going to attempt a flanking maneuver. When the signal was given, all Royal Guard members were to provide covering fire toward the sky, creating noise and distraction, Marcus acknowledged. He explained the plan to the guards near him in quick whispers. The Special Forces negotiator was still talking to the attackers. His voice remained calm, almost soothing, telling them there was a way out of this that didn't end in death, promising fair treatment if they surrendered. But Marcus could hear the underlying steel in the man's tone. The unspoken message was clear. Surrender now or face the consequences. One of the attackers suddenly broke from the group. They dropped their weapon and raised their hands high. The others shouted at them, but the defector kept walking slowly toward the Special Forces line. Hands up, no sudden movements. The soldiers moved forward with zip ties ready. Within seconds, the surrendering attacker was on the ground, being searched and secured. That left 5, including the leader with the trigger. The situation had shifted. One had broken. Doubt would be spreading among the others. The Special Forces commander pressed the advantage. His voice on the megaphone became more insistent. Your friend made the smart choice. You can too. This doesn't have to end badly. Marcus saw the leader's shoulders slump slightly. Just for a moment. A tiny crack in the facade. Then the figure straightened again, but the damage was done. Confidence was bleeding away. The perfect plan had fallen apart. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and running out of options. The signal came through Marcus's earpiece. 3 sharp clicks. He raised his weapon toward the sky and fired a burst. All around the square, other guards did the same. The noise was deafening. Under cover of the distraction, the tactical team made their move. They came from behind the attackers using the smoke and confusion. Marcus couldn't see exactly what happened next. Just a flurry of movement, shouts, and then silence. When the smoke cleared, all 5 remaining attackers were on the ground. The tactical team had moved with incredible speed and precision. The trigger device had been secured before it could be activated. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. It was over. The immediate threat had been neutralized. All around the square, soldiers and police officers slowly emerged from their defensive positions. Marcus stood up, his legs protesting after being crouched for so long. His entire body ached. The adrenaline that had kept him going was starting to fade, replaced by exhaustion and the weight of what had just happened. Sarah walked over to him, her face pale beneath the blood and dirt. They didn't say anything. They just stood together, 2 people who had survived something terrible. The square was a disaster zone. Scorch marks from explosions blackened the cobblestones. Bullet holes pocked the ancient stone walls. Broken glass covered the ground like deadly snow. The fountain that Marcus had used for cover was damaged, water leaking from cracks in its basin. The vendor carts were overturned, merchandise scattered everywhere. The violin that had been playing peaceful music just an hour ago lay trampled and broken. Medical teams rushed in now that the area was secure. Paramedics moved quickly from victim to victim, assessing injuries, providing emergency care. Marcus saw them load a young woman onto a stretcher. She was crying, calling for someone named Michael. A paramedic held her hand and spoke softly while they worked. The scene repeated across the square. So many hurt, so many traumatized. Commander Peterson appeared, walking briskly across the square with his security detail. His uniform was immaculate as always, but his face showed the strain of the last hour. He stopped in front of Marcus and Sarah, looking them both over with a practiced eye. He asked if they were injured. Marcus shook his head, though his shoulder was definitely going to bruise. Sarah admitted to the cut on her forehead. Peterson ordered them both to get medical attention after debriefing. The captured attackers were being loaded into armored vehicles under heavy guard. Their masks had been removed, revealing faces that looked surprisingly ordinary. Marcus had expected monsters, but he saw mostly young people, some barely out of their teens. What had driven them to this? What cause did they think justified such violence? He knew those questions would be answered during interrogations, but right now they just looked like frightened kids who had made terrible choices. Other royal guards were gathering near the palace gates. Marcus recognized most of them. Some had minor injuries. All looked shaken. They had trained for this scenario but hoped never to face it. Today that hope had been shattered. Lieutenant Harrison approached, limping slightly. He had twisted his ankle diving for cover, but refused medical attention until everyone else had been treated. That was just like him, always putting others first. The crime scene investigators were already at work, photographing everything, collecting evidence, marking locations. The camera that had been set up by the attackers was being carefully examined. Its memory card would be analyzed to see what had been recorded and possibly transmitted. Intelligence officers were scouring every inch of the vans, looking for clues about who had planned this attack and whether there might be more cells preparing similar actions. Marcus caught sight of the young guard he had tried to encourage during the standoff. The kid was sitting on the palace steps, head in his hands. Marcus walked over and sat beside him. No words were necessary at first. Sometimes just being there was enough. After a moment, the young guard looked up with red-rimmed eyes. He admitted he had been terrified, thought he was going to die. Marcus told him that was normal. Fear was natural. What mattered was that he had stayed at his post and done his duty. The young man nodded slowly, seeming to take comfort from that. A military officer approached Marcus and requested that he accompany them to the command center for immediate debriefing. They needed his account of events while memories were fresh. Marcus agreed, though what he really wanted was to go home and hug his daughter. But duty came first. It always did. He told Sarah he would see her at the debriefing. She squeezed his arm briefly before heading off to get her forehead treated. The walk to the command center took Marcus through parts of the palace he rarely visited. The halls were buzzing with activity. Staff members hurried past carrying documents and equipment. Security protocols had been activated throughout the entire complex. Every entrance was locked down. Every corridor was being swept for any threats. The attack on the square had sent ripples through the entire security apparatus. In the command center, screens covered the walls showing camera feeds from around the city. Analysts were tracking every lead, coordinating with police units across the capital. Marcus was directed to a small room where 2 intelligence officers waited. They were professional and courteous, but their questions were sharp and thorough. What time did he first notice anything unusual? Describe the van in detail. How many attackers did he personally engage? Did any of them speak? Were there any identifying marks or tattoos visible? Marcus answered everything as best he could. Some details were crystal clear in his memory. The sound of the first explosion, Sarah's voice on the radio, the feel of his weapon's recoil. Other details were fuzzy, lost in the chaos and adrenaline. He admitted when he wasn't sure rather than guessing. The officers seemed to appreciate his honesty. They told him he had performed admirably under extreme circumstances. The royal family was safe because of actions taken by guards like him. After the initial debriefing, Marcus was finally released to see a medic. His shoulder was examined, prodded, moved through various positions. Nothing broken, just deep bruising. The medic gave him pain medication and told him to ice it regularly. Marcus accepted the pills and advice, though he knew he probably wouldn't follow either. He was too wired, too full of nervous energy to rest properly. He found Sarah in the medical area, a fresh bandage across her forehead. She had been lucky. The cut wasn't deep and wouldn't leave much of a scar. They sat together in the waiting area, not talking much, just processing. Other guards came and went. Some had more serious injuries, broken bones from diving for cover, burns from being too close to explosions. One guard had taken a bullet through his leg but would recover fully according to the doctors. News was filtering in about casualties. 3 civilians had been killed. 14 more were in serious condition at hospitals around the city. The numbers could have been so much higher. If the Royal Guard and police hadn't responded so quickly, if the special forces hadn't arrived when they did, if any one of a dozen things had gone differently, this could have been a massacre. Marcus thought about the camera again. Why had the attackers wanted to film this? Were they working for some terrorist organization that wanted to spread their message? Or was it something else? The intelligence officers hadn't shared their theories, but Marcus could see the wheels turning in their minds. This attack had been planned carefully. The timing, the multiple explosives, the coordination. This wasn't some amateur operation. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Messages from his wife, increasingly frantic. The news had broken. She had seen reports of the attack and was terrified. Marcus called her immediately, hearing her sob with relief when he answered. He assured her he was fine, just bruised. Yes, it had been scary. Yes, he was coming home as soon as possible. He promised to hug their daughter extra tight tonight. His wife made him promise to be careful, as if he had any control over such things. He promised anyway. Commander Peterson appeared again, this time addressing all the guards who had been present during the attack. He thanked them for their service and courage. He informed them that counseling would be available for anyone who needed it. No shame in seeking help after trauma. The kingdom took care of its protectors. Marcus appreciated the words, though he wasn't sure he would take advantage of the offer. Maybe that was stubborn pride. Maybe he should be smarter about his mental health. He would think about it. 3 days after the attack, Marcus returned to duty. His shoulder still ached, but he refused to take time off. Staying home felt wrong when there was work to be done. The square had been cleaned up remarkably quickly. Repair crews had worked around the clock. Fresh cobblestones replaced the damaged ones. New glass filled the shattered windows. But no amount of repair work could erase what had happened. Everyone who walked through the square now did so with a different awareness. The sense of safety had been broken. Security protocols had changed dramatically. More guards patrolled the perimeter. Cameras had been added. Barriers now controlled vehicle access. Every van or truck was thoroughly inspected before being allowed near the palace grounds. The changes made sense, but they also felt like admissions of vulnerability. The kingdom that had seemed so secure had been penetrated by a handful of determined attackers. Marcus attended the memorial service for the 3 civilians who had died. Their names were Anna Martinez, a teacher who had been bringing her class to see the palace; David Wu, an office worker on his way to a meeting; and Elena Kowalski, a tourist from Poland visiting with her husband. Marcus stood in his dress uniform and listened to their families speak about lives cut short by senseless violence. He fought to keep his emotions under control. These deaths weighed heavily on him, even though rationally he knew he couldn't have prevented them. The investigation was revealing disturbing details. The attackers belonged to a domestic extremist group that opposed the monarchy. They had been radicalized online, meeting in secret chat rooms where they shared increasingly violent rhetoric. Intelligence agencies had been monitoring some of their communications, but hadn't identified this specific cell. Now there was intense pressure to find any other members of the group who might be planning similar attacks. Sarah had returned to duty as well. They often found themselves working the same shifts, drawn together by shared experience. Sometimes they talked about what happened. Other times they avoided the subject entirely. Marcus noticed she startled more easily now. Loud noises made her flinch. He wondered if he showed similar signs of trauma. Probably. They were all carrying invisible scars alongside any physical injuries. The royal family made a public appearance a week after the attack. They walked through the square, stopping to speak with guards and thank them personally. When the Queen shook Marcus's hand, she held it for a moment and looked him directly in the eyes. She told him the kingdom owed him a debt of gratitude. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. He managed to thank her and assure her it was his honor to serve. It was a brief interaction, but it meant everything to him. Public reaction to the attack had been intense. There were vigils held across the city, people leaving flowers and candles in the square. But there was also anger and fear. Some citizens demanded stricter security measures. Others questioned whether the monarchy was worth protecting if it made the kingdom a target. Debates raged in Parliament and on television. Marcus tried to avoid the news coverage. Everyone had opinions, but few of them had faced actual danger. The captured attackers were being interrogated. Marcus learned through unofficial channels that they were cooperating to varying degrees. Some remained defiant, claiming they were heroes fighting tyranny. Others seemed to realize the magnitude of what they had done and were providing information to investigators. The leader, the one who had held the trigger, had said nothing at all. Just sat in silence no matter what questions were asked. Marcus struggled with nightmares. In his dreams, the attack played out differently. Sometimes he died. Sometimes Sarah did. Sometimes his daughter was in the square and he couldn't reach her. He would wake up sweating, heart racing, taking several moments to remember he was safe at home. His wife noticed but didn't push him to talk about it. She just held him until he fell back asleep. Her patience and understanding helped more than any words could. Training exercises took on new intensity after the attack. Everyone was drilling harder, preparing for scenarios they now knew could really happen. The complacency that had crept in during years of peace was gone. Marcus pushed himself and his team relentlessly. They practiced response times, coordination, communication under stress. He was determined that if another attack came, they would be even more prepared. Lieutenant Harrison was promoted to captain for his actions during the attack. He had taken command of the western perimeter and held it despite being injured. Marcus attended the ceremony and applauded genuinely. Harrison deserved the recognition. They had all performed well that day, but some had gone above and beyond. The young guard who had been so terrified received a commendation for remaining at his post. Marcus was proud to see the kid receive it. Intelligence briefings became more frequent. Marcus and other senior guards were now included in threat assessment meetings. They learned about online chatter being monitored, suspicious activities being investigated, and international connections being traced. The extremist group that had attacked the square had links to similar organizations in other countries. This was part of a larger pattern of anti-monarchy violence that was spreading across Europe. One morning, Marcus arrived at his post to find journalists gathered outside the palace gates. They were filming a news segment about security improvements. A reporter approached and asked if he would answer some questions. Marcus politely declined. Palace policy was clear about not speaking to media without authorization, but the reporter persisted, asking how it felt to be a hero. Marcus bristled at the word. He wasn't a hero. He was a soldier who had done his job. Heroes were the people who died. Heroes were the civilians who helped each other during the chaos. Sarah surprised everyone by taking advantage of the counseling services. She talked openly about experiencing trauma symptoms and encouraged others to seek help without shame. Her honesty broke down barriers. Within days, several other guards had scheduled appointments with the trauma counselors. Marcus finally admitted to himself that he probably needed to do the same. His nightmares weren't improving. His irritability at home was getting worse. His wife deserved better. He made an appointment for the following week. The counselor was a woman named Dr. Rachel Foster who specialized in first responder trauma. She didn't push Marcus to talk about things he wasn't ready to discuss. Instead, she taught him techniques for managing anxiety and processing difficult emotions. It felt strange at first, uncomfortable even, but slowly Marcus began to see the value in it. Naming his fears somehow made them less powerful. The trial for the attackers was scheduled to begin in 3 months. Marcus would have to testify about what he witnessed. The prosecutor had already met with him several times to prepare. Reliving that morning in detail for court was going to be difficult, but it was necessary. Justice demanded that the full story be told. The families of the victims deserved to see accountability. The kingdom needed to show that such violence would not be tolerated. Meanwhile, life continued. Marcus attended his daughter's birthday party, arriving with the biggest gift and the warmest hugs. She was thrilled to see him. Oblivious to how close she had come to losing her father, he cherished every moment of that party, every laugh, every silly game. These were the things worth protecting. Not just the royal family or the palace, but the ordinary joys of ordinary people living their lives. The square slowly returned to normal activity. Tourists came back, though in smaller numbers. Street vendors reopened their carts. The violin player returned, though Marcus noticed he positioned himself farther from the palace now. Children still came with their classes to learn about history and government. The kingdom was resilient. It refused to let fear win. Marcus stood at his post one morning watching the sunrise paint the palace walls golden. 2 months had passed since the attack. His shoulder had healed. His nightmares were less frequent. The counseling was helping. Sarah stood at her usual position near the eastern gate, whole and strong. The young guard who had been so frightened during his first crisis now stood with quiet confidence. They had all grown from the experience, though none of them would have chosen such a harsh teacher. Commander Peterson had implemented all the security recommendations from the investigation. The palace was more secure than ever, but everyone knew that determined attackers could always find vulnerabilities. Perfect security was impossible. What mattered was preparedness, vigilance, and the courage to respond when needed. Those qualities couldn't be installed like cameras or barriers. They lived in the hearts of the people who wore the uniform. Marcus thought about legacy and duty. His father had been a royal guard before him. His grandfather, too. It was a family tradition of service stretching back generations. Now Marcus understood the weight his father must have carried, the knowledge that danger could come at any moment. the responsibility to be ready, the sacrifices made to protect something larger than oneself. He felt a deeper connection to his family's history. As the morning progressed and the square filled with people starting their day, Marcus allowed himself a moment of gratitude. He was alive. His colleagues were alive. The royal family was safe. The kingdom endured. The attack had been a tragedy, but it had also revealed strength and character. In the face of violence and chaos, ordinary people had so. The morning of the trial arrival brought unexpected nervousness to Marcus. He had faced armed attackers without hesitation, but the thought of sitting in a courtroom and recounting every detail made his hands shake slightly. He dressed carefully in his formal uniform, making sure every button and medal was positioned perfectly. His wife helped him with his tie, her fingers gentle and reassuring. She kissed his cheek and told him he would do fine. Just tell the truth. That was all anyone could ask. The courthouse was surrounded by security barriers and armed officers. Media vans lined the streets, satellite dishes pointed skyward. This trial was attracting international attention. The attack on the Royal Square had become a symbol of the tensions between tradition and extremism that were playing out across many nations. Marcus walked through the security checkpoints. His credentials verified multiple times before he was allowed inside. The courtroom itself was modern and imposing. Dark wood paneling covered the walls. The judge's bench sat elevated, commanding respect. The jury box held 12 citizens who had been selected after weeks of careful questioning. Marcus took his seat in the witness area alongside other guards who would testify. Sarah was there, looking composed despite the pressure. Lieutenant Harrison gave Marcus a small nod of encouragement. The defendants were brought in under heavy guard. 6 individuals in plain clothing, no longer masked or armed, looking smaller somehow than they had that terrible morning. Marcus studied their faces. The leader, identified as Thomas Brennan, sat with perfect posture and a blank expression. The youngest defendant, a girl named Sophie Chen, who was only 19, kept her eyes down, refusing to look at anyone. The others showed varying levels of emotion, ranging from defiance to what might have been regret. The prosecution began by presenting an overview of the attack. Security camera footage played on large screens showing the chaos from multiple angles. Marcus watched civilians running in terror. He saw himself diving behind the fountain. The images were difficult to view, bringing back the sounds and smells of that morning. Several jury members looked visibly shaken. One woman covered her mouth, fighting tears. When Marcus was called to testify, he walked to the witness stand with steady steps despite his internal nervousness. He swore to tell the truth and then answered the prosecutor's questions clearly and precisely. He described his position that morning. The first sign something was wrong: the explosions, the engagement with attackers, the coordination with other guards and special forces. His military training served him well. He reported facts without dramatization, letting the events speak for themselves. The defense attorney's cross-examination was aggressive. She questioned Marcus's memory of specific details. She suggested that in the confusion and fear, he might have misidentified who shot first. She implied that excessive force might have been used against her clients. Marcus remained calm, refusing to be rattled. He acknowledged when he was uncertain about something while standing firm on what he knew for certain. The attorney seemed frustrated by his composure. Sarah's testimony was equally powerful. She spoke about the explosion near her position, the training that kicked in automatically, the split-second decisions that had to be made. She described seeing civilians hurt and the desperate need to end the threat as quickly as possible to prevent more casualties. Her voice remained steady throughout, though Marcus could see the cost of maintaining that control. The families of the victims testified next. Anna Martinez's mother spoke about her daughter's dedication to teaching and her love of history. She described the excitement Anna had felt about bringing her students to see the palace. David Wu's wife talked about their plans for the future, plans that would never happen now. Elena Kowalski's husband gave his testimony through a translator, his grief transcending language barriers. These testimonies hit harder than any security footage. They put human faces to the tragedy. Medical experts detailed the injuries sustained by survivors. Doctors described treating burns, broken bones, and psychological trauma. Paramedics recalled the scene in the square, the challenge of providing care while the situation was still active. Each testimony built a comprehensive picture of the attack's impact, not just in the immediate violence, but in the lasting damage to so many lives. The prosecution then called terrorism experts who explained the extremist ideology that had motivated the attack. They presented evidence of online radicalization, showing chat logs where the defendants had discussed their hatred of the monarchy and their plans to strike a symbolic target. The communications were chilling in their casual discussion of violence. They had known innocent people might die and proceeded anyway, believing their cause justified any cost. When the defense presented its case, they didn't deny that the attack happened or that their clients participated. Instead, they argued about degrees of involvement and states of mind. The youngest defendant, Sophie, had been manipulated by older members of the group. She hadn't understood the full scope of what would happen. Others had experienced difficult backgrounds that made them vulnerable to extremist recruitment. The defense painted a picture of misguided young people led astray rather than hardened terrorists. Marcus found himself conflicting about this argument. Part of him felt no sympathy. They had killed innocent people. They had created terror and trauma. Motivations and background couldn't excuse that. But another part recognized that hate was taught, not innate. These defendants had been radicalized gradually, their thinking distorted by exposure to extremist propaganda. Both things could be true. They could be victims of manipulation and also perpetrators of violence. The trial continued for weeks. Expert witnesses debated. Evidence was examined from every angle. The jury listened intently, taking notes, asking occasional questions through the judge. Marcus attended as much as his duty schedule allowed. He felt an obligation to see this through, to witness justice being pursued even if it couldn't undo what happened. During breaks, Marcus spoke with other survivors. The woman who had clutched her bleeding arm that morning was there, testifying about her experience. The elderly man who had fallen was there too, walking with a cane now but determined to face the people who had hurt him. There was something powerful about these ordinary citizens refusing to hide or give in to fear. They were fighting back in the only way available to them now, by participating in the legal process. The media coverage was constant and sometimes frustrating. Reporters turned everything into sound bites and headlines. Complicated questions about security and extremism were reduced to simple narratives. Marcus declined interview requests repeatedly. He had nothing to add to what he said in court. His duty was to serve, not to be a celebrity or political symbol. Finally, closing arguments arrived. The prosecutor summarized the evidence methodically, connecting each piece to build an undeniable conclusion. These defendants had planned and executed a terrorist attack. They had killed 3 people and injured many more. They had attacked not just the royal family but the entire kingdom and its values. Justice demanded conviction on all charges. The defense countered that while crimes were committed, the varying levels of involvement and culpability needed to be considered. Mercy had a place alongside justice. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Marcus tried to go about his normal routine, but concentration was difficult. Everyone involved in the case felt the weight of waiting. The verdict would send a message about how the kingdom responded to terrorism. It would impact national security policy. It would affect how victims and their families found closure. So much rode on 12 ordinary people wrestling with an extraordinary decision. The courthouse was packed when the jury returned. Marcus sat in the gallery with Sarah and other guards who had testified. The families of the victims occupied the front rows, hands clasped together, faces showing the strain of waiting. Media representatives filled every available seat, their cameras ready to capture the moment. The judge entered and called for order. The room fell silent, the tension almost physical in its intensity. The jury foreman stood, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, who had carried the burden of this decision along with his fellow jurors. The judge asked if they had reached verdicts. Yes, they had. For each defendant, guilty verdicts on multiple counts: terrorism, murder, conspiracy, weapons charges. The list went on. Sophie Chen, the youngest, received guilty verdicts but on lesser charges, reflecting her age and lesser role. But there would be no complete acquittals. Everyone would face consequences. Marcus watched the defendants as the verdicts were read. Thomas Brennan showed no emotion, his face remaining blank. Sophie began crying quietly. Others showed resignation, perhaps having expected this outcome. Their attorneys made notes, likely already planning appeals. The families of victims held each other. some crying with relief, others showing no visible reaction. Justice had been served in the legal sense, but it couldn't bring back the dead or erase the trauma. Sentencing came weeks later. The judge delivered lengthy statements explaining each decision. Thomas Brennan received life imprisonment without possibility of parole. He had been the leader, the planner, the one most committed to the ideology of violence. The others received sentences ranging from 25 years to Sophie's 12 years in a facility for young offenders. The judge spoke about deterrence and punishment, but also about the tragedy of young lives consumed by hate. It was a somber proceeding that left no one feeling triumphant. After the trial concluded, Marcus found himself at a crossroads. He could continue his service as before, or he could request a transfer to a different assignment. The square held too many difficult memories. Every morning at his post he saw ghosts. The spot where civilians had fallen. The fountain where he had sheltered. The gates the attackers had tried to breach. Commander Peterson told him there would be no shame in requesting a change. Marcus thought about it for days. In the end, he decided to stay. Running from the memories wouldn't make them disappear. This was his post, his responsibility, his calling. The attack had tested him and he had not been found wanting. Walking away now felt like letting the terrorists win in some small way. So he returned to duty in the square, determined to reclaim it from the darkness of that morning. Sarah made the same choice. They talked about it one evening after their shift, sitting on a bench near the fountain that had been fully repaired. She admitted the square was hard for her too. Every siren made her heart race. Every van that drove past made her hand move toward her weapon. But this was where she belonged. They had protected something important here. They would continue to protect it. The conversation helped Marcus feel less alone in his struggle. Life gradually found a new rhythm. The square remained more heavily secured than before, but people adapted. Children still came with their school groups. Tourists still took photos. The violin player still performed his music. Marcus stood at his post each morning and watched the sun rise over the palace, grateful for another day of peace. The attack had changed him, but it hadn't broken him. His daughter asked him one day if he was a hero. Marcus thought carefully before answering. He told her that heroes were people who did the right thing even when it was scary. By that definition, maybe he was. But so were the paramedics who treated the wounded. So were the civilians who helped each other during the chaos. So were the police officers who ran toward danger. Heroism wasn't about grand gestures. It was about ordinary people choosing courage when faced with fear. The counseling continued. Dr. Foster helped Marcus understand that healing wasn't linear. Some days would be harder than others. Triggers would appear unexpectedly. The key was not to judge himself for struggling, but to use the coping tools he had learned. Marcus appreciated her practical approach. She didn't promise the nightmares would disappear completely. She promised he would learn to live with them, to function despite them. Changes rippled through the entire Royal Guard following the attack. Training programs were updated based on lessons learned. Communication systems were improved. Response protocols were refined. The intelligence sharing between agencies was enhanced. Commander Peterson was determined that if another attack came, they would be even better prepared. But everyone hoped such preparation would prove unnecessary. Marcus received a medal for valor in a ceremony attended by the Queen herself. She pinned it to his uniform and thanked him personally again. He accepted the honor on behalf of all the guards who had served that day, knowing that survival had often been more about luck than skill. Bullets had missed him by inches. Different decisions could have led to tragedy. He wore the medal with pride, but also with humility. The square held a memorial dedication on the anniversary of the attack. A stone monument was unveiled bearing the names of Anna Martinez, David Wu, and Elena Kowalski. It stood near the fountain, a permanent reminder of lives lost to violence. The families attended, placing flowers at the base. Marcus stood at attention during the ceremony, fighting back tears. He had failed to save those 3 people. That weight would always stay with him, but he had saved others. When he allowed himself to think about it, he knew his actions and those of his colleagues had prevented a much larger tragedy. The attackers had planted enough explosives to potentially kill dozens. The quick response had limited the damage. That had to count for something. Dr. Foster encouraged him to acknowledge the success alongside the grief. Both were true and both deserved recognition. Sarah was promoted to captain, taking command of the eastern perimeter. She had earned it through her performance during the attack and her leadership afterward. Marcus attended her promotion ceremony with genuine happiness. She deserved this recognition. Her courage and composure under fire had been remarkable. She would be an excellent captain, bringing both tactical skill and emotional intelligence to the role. The young guard who had been so frightened during his first crisis had grown into a confident soldier. Marcus watched him mentor even newer recruits, passing on lessons learned through experience. The cycle continued, each generation of guards learning from those who came before, building on accumulated wisdom and sacrifice. It was a proud tradition, and Marcus was honored to be part of it. As months became a year, the acute pain faded into something more manageable. Marcus still thought about the attack, but it no longer dominated his thoughts. He could enjoy time with his family without guilt. He could laugh without feeling like he was betraying the victims. He could sleep most nights without nightmares. Healing was happening slowly but surely. Standing at his post one morning, Marcus noticed the square was particularly beautiful. Spring flowers bloomed in carefully tended beds. Birds sang in the trees. People walked past smiling, going about their lives without fear. This was what he protected, not just buildings or royalty, but the freedom for ordinary people to live ordinary lives without terror. That purpose gave meaning to everything he had endured. The violin player began a new song, something cheerful and bright. Marcus found himself almost smiling beneath his professional expression. Life continued despite tragedy. Joy returned after sorrow. The kingdom endured because its people refused to surrender to fear. That resilience, that determination to keep going, was the real strength that no terrorist could ever destroy. Marcus thought about his father and grandfather, about all the guards who had stood at these posts through the decades. They had each faced their own challenges, their own dangers. Now he had faced his. He had been tested by fire and emerged scarred but unbroken. The tradition would continue through him to future generations. That continuity, that commitment to duty and service was what made the Royal Guard more than just soldiers. They were guardians of something precious and worth protecting. The sun climbed higher in the sky. Another shift was beginning. Marcus stood tall at his post, ready for whatever came next, knowing he was exactly where he was meant to be.